Hello, everybody. It's a big pleasure to be with our Port School audience again in these segments. We're very pleasure to have Regan Booth with us today. I just met Regan 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, in Worldport Expo in Iowa. So, Regan, thank you very much for being here. And how are you?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm doing pretty well.
So we have a very nice chat conversation with Regan. We were having very nice lunch, I think, in the Port Chekhov tent. So Regan, why don't you start telling us a little bit about yourself? Where are you coming from and how you end up related to the pork industry?
Absolutely. So, my name is Regan McGuill Booth. I am actually an attorney, and I grew up in the Gulf Coast region of Texas. My dad had a pretty small show pig operation, so we bred and sold show pigs for the vast majority of my
Wow.
childhood. And then as I got a little bit older, I started showing pigs. So I showed pigs all 10 years to the Texas 4-H program. And that was really my first introduction into animal agriculture. And I just absolutely fell in love with the pork industry. So get a little bit older, I chose to go to Texas A&M University and I got my degree in animal science with a certificate of meat science and loved that. Had a lot of great opportunities. And from there, I decided that there was more that I could be doing for agriculture and for the pork industry specifically. So I chose to go to law school. I went to Michigan State University College of Law and I froze for 3 years in Michigan, getting my law degree.
Okay.
And in that time, I also had really amazing opportunities throughout ag and specifically pork in growing my legal education. So I spent some time working in rural Ohio, working with some pig farmers on their business and their estate plans. I was working with the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, and that had some more policy implications on pork producers. And then to finish up and kind of round out my legal training, I spent a little over a year working as a legal and contracts intern with the National Pork Board and the Pork Checkoff. And that was just absolutely an incredible experience. I became really involved in their contracts and their trademarks, a lot of their antitrust and their federal regulatory work with the USDA, and just was an incredible experience. And so I kind of geared myself going into becoming an attorney to have more of a role in the pork industry because of that experience. So today I own my own law firm. My firm is the Booth Law Co. We are currently in Texas and California. And then I also counsel and advise all across the country. I just found out about half an hour before this call that I'm officially licensed in South Carolina. I just have to sign a little piece of paper.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I do currently live in South Carolina. I'm looking to get involved in the pork industry here in the Carolinas, and it's been a whirlwind. And I still have the opportunity to work with state trade organizations, and then occasionally I do still do work for the National Pork Board.
So fantastic. So it's a lot that it's a lot of interest that you have been coming from your roots coming from the ag industry and mostly pork livestock.
Mhm.
But when I was looking into your profile, there was an article or some, let's say, program or was like a survey. How do you feel the involvement of the woman more and more in the ag industry? Because historically has been is changing and mostly in your generation.
Mhm.
How you as a professional are now being exposed to one of the most important industries in USA. How do you think is that transition going? Is more space for women to have important roles, or is still homework to do?
I think it's so interesting and I love having this conversation because there's so many ways we can look at this. So I think back to my childhood and kind of growing up in agriculture, growing up in a very rural environment. And it was very much a man's world. The women helped out, they cooked, they cleaned, they did a lot more of the secretarial work for these farms. And as I got older, especially high school and college, that's when I think I started to notice the shift. And so I get to college at Texas A&M, and this is still kind of something that everyone's talking about is we need to get more women in agriculture. We need to really amplify women in agriculture. And I'm looking around my classrooms and there's 75% women. So there's not even that many men in the classrooms learning and getting these advanced degrees in agriculture as there once was. So now we have this whole generation of mostly women. And so that's kind of the first angle. And even at Texas A&M in the Animal Science Building, Clayburg, there's this massive mural. I mean, it's huge. It spans this huge hallway. And I remember standing outside one day looking at it, and it's kind of like the history of agriculture is what this mural is. And it's all these little bitty faces throughout all these different periods of ag. And every single one of the faces is a man. And the only woman in this entire mural is a secretary on a typewriter. And that was it.
Okay.
And so I remember that really struck me because I was like, this is crazy to me. Women have been playing a bigger role in agriculture for quite some time, and they're going to continue to do so. So, as I kind of getting a little bit older, getting a little bit more advanced, and really seeing women take over the family farms and they're going back to the farms and they're leading the operations has been so amazing to see that really happening and that being embraced the way that it has been. And even for myself as a female attorney, which is also a very male dominated field, and being in agriculture, I was at an American Agricultural Law Association conference, and I'm giving a talk about internships and hiring to focus on diversity as you're hiring. And I'm sitting there talking about, the number of women that are coming up in the field and why it's important to be hiring women and not to be, and how we're going to treat them and train them and all these things. And I'm looking around and it's a room full of women and then a few men kind of scattered in there. And so it's just really interesting to me that, we are having this conversation when the vast majority of people involved in the conversation are women. And so I think that the numbers alone kind of speak for themselves a lot there. And just kind of looking at that. And so I think as we continue to amplify women and support them as they're kind of becoming the leaders of these agricultural organizations and their operations, I think we're doing a pretty good job so far. I'm always going to say that there's probably room for improvement in education. But I think, we've seen a lot of changes really fast over the last decade or so.
And you name just because you just mentioned that, what may be based in your experience, your background, Texas A&M, then your law firm, then this experience specifically in the project of what will be the improvement in education? What is that space after all that you're seeing? And mostly in this time that information is going so fast, we're lacking of attentions, so much social media, so much distraction. So right now, being educated for me is a challenge to keep a focus in a specific uh, target actions, and it's something that we're facing in every other industry. Like I said before, when I met you in Iowa, I was very excited seeing all these students with a lot of energy, passion, and interest going into this industry. But the way that we're educating or transmitting technology is completely different in these actual times. How do you think we can move forward and getting more educational tools?
I think when we start looking at it, you're exactly right. Like we're exposed to more information, more data, more numbers, more just stuff in our brains every single day. But at the same time, you can say that has negative implications or positive implications. I'm not an expert in that. But at the same time, we have more access to educational resources and just differently access to financial resources, um, and things that are really going to help us to kind of bring everything together and move our operations forward. we look at the next generation of pork producers. This is the most educated generation of producers that I think we've ever had. And so it's incredible that we have, they're getting the degree, they're coming back to the farm, which we've also never had. A lot of times when you send your kid off to college from the farm, they're probably not going to come back to the farm. And so you wanted to keep them close, and that's not what's happening anymore. And so I think it's not even just an educational shift, but it's truly a generational shift and a generational shift in the mindset of how we look at this, how we treat our peers, what we're learning in our higher education programs, and even not even higher education, but just community education, and what that looks like and how that shapes our mentality moving forward in the industry.
In my experience, I have been seeing uh, two ways. For example, people that were born and they grew up in farms,
Mhm.
that in some point they say, I don't want to be related to farms anymore. And there is another group that say, I love this and I want to keep legacy. I want to keep running my family farming business. Where do you think that happens? Because like you say, some a family owned and some traditional kids go to college and they come back to run the operation happily, and some don't.
Hmm.
So because and then they have another thing like a country, like a global producer, we need to keep producing a clean meat using a resource in a very sustainable way, how to use corn, because at the end of the day, swine pig industry is just transforming a vegetable protein into a machine that we call an animal, and we produce animal protein. That, by the way, is very nice. So the thing is how we keep going this transfer of generations. For example, I see your passion and keep being educated and put some value in the industry. But not all the generation are the same.
And I don't think that there's one straight answer to that question. I think that there's a lot of factors that go into it. So, from my experience and my peers and my friends that have gone back to the farm, I have some of them who always knew that they were going to go back to the farm. So, they came, they got their education, maybe they spent a little bit of time in industry, and then they went back. And that was kind of always their intention. I have other friends. I have a very dear friend of mine. He went to college and he was adamant. He was going to go to law school. He wanted to be this big white collar attorney. And he even took the LSAT for admissions to law school and then just decided that he wanted to go home and ranch with his dad. And that's exactly what he did. And he's so happy doing it. And so when you talk to him about it, he says, I was raised in this way. My parents were always pushing me to really go make something of myself. And I get into college and, everything makes sense to me. And I feel like I kind of figured out the secret code to making something of myself within the ranch and within our operations. And so I think that a lot of kids are coming to college and they're seeing, maybe they saw their parents struggle or their family struggle on the farm for a generation. And they're like, maybe if I do something different, maybe if I use what I'm learning, maybe there's a secret sauce to this a little bit. And so I kind of wonder how much it has to do with that and the advances in technology and the advances that we're having in branding and marketing, where a farm really can make it to say, they're not going to have to struggle every single year. And of course, that's always going to come with its challenges. But I do think my generation and the generation coming up after me, we're so optimistic and positive, and we have this mentality of we call it delusional confidence of
Okay.
we can do it, we can make it, we can make money doing this. And so I think that might be a big part of it is kids just thinking, I have this set of tools that my parents didn't have or my grandparents didn't have, and I'm going to go see what we can do with this.
In the conversation when I met you, you told me that you start getting related to the pork checkoff because you were an intern,
Hmm.
right? Okay, so what really captured your attention to keep moving forward with the pork checkoff? What really captured your attention to keep, let's say, adding value in the pork industry instead of going looking for another industry? What really capture of these people, how they do business, how they relate to each other, what really captured your attention?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think part of it is growing up in the pork industry and having that fundamental background in it. And pork, it's just different. It's different than the other protein groups. It's different than, your crop cousins in agriculture. And so, in my firm, I work broadly with all facets of agriculture, wildlife, fisheries, all these areas. Pork just has such a special place in my heart because of my background. And I think that the experiences that it granted me, if I look back on my life and without the experiences that I had in the swine industry, I probably wouldn't have gone to law school. I probably wouldn't be where I am today. Even without having this internship with the pork checkoff and connecting with the leadership of the check or the National Pork Board and them kind of helping me to develop. I just absolutely wouldn't be where I am today.
Where your passion come from?
I don't know. This is something that my husband and I talk about quite a bit, because he is yet to find something that he's as passionate about as I am about just agriculture. And, I have no idea. It's something that, I've always kind of had. I have a brother, we're raised the same way, and he has a very similar passion as I do, just about other things. And so, I don't know.
It's something that you build or you cultivate, or you something that you born with.
I definitely think you have to cultivate it. It's so easy to find something that you're passionate about and that you're excited about. But if you don't continue to seek out opportunities to grow that and educate yourself and learn more about it, it's very easy to let that kind of die. And I've seen that before. So I first out of law school, I took a job in not outside of agriculture. I was doing insurance defense litigation. So there's a lot of personal injury, some construction defects, a little bit of nonprofit work. So it's not, I think I had two agricultural related cases while I was there. And I would talk to my friends who are still in the industry, and it's like we weren't even speaking the same languages. We weren't happy about the same things. It was just very unique. And so I think for those couple of years, I was getting a great experience, and it kind of brought me to where I am today. But removing myself from where I was really happy and where I was passionate, I definitely could feel it going away a little bit. So I do think it's absolutely something that you have to cultivate once you find it.
So, well, I really am enjoying this discussion, and it's part of our goal here in Port School, sharing stories of um people that is involved in the industry, like we say before, but your angle is different because you're coming from an agriculture background. You went to college, then you are actively participating in, like I say, one of the most important agriculture, let's say, associations, not just in the US, but globally, because US, they export a lot of meat globally. So can you, being in this, let's say, exposure, what has been one of your most challenging cases that really confronting you when you say what I'm gonna do here and how you navigate that, if you can name something.
That's a tough one for sure. I think that I have a lot of cases that I can say, yeah, these are definitely the most challenging. And it always seems to come down to a matter of resources. So whether you're right or you're wrong when it comes to litigation or just being in the law, if you don't have the resources to back yourself up and to fight, then you're put into a corner. It makes my job challenging. It makes your position challenging. And so I think that's been something really interesting just to kind of see and apply to other aspects of my life is that, nothing's a some win or a some loss. It's how much resources do you have backing you to even get to that point to make that determination.
And what type of resource are we talking about? Personal, educational,
I would
set
say
of mind?
financial is the first one.
Okay.
That's the big one. And then from there, it's I kind of a combination of educational and social is how you react in how you handle yourself throughout the course of just challenges. So I would say the hardest thing that I've had to deal with in most of my cases has been managing people and kind of keeping them from stopping them or from hurting themselves. So because you can take on any case and you can review all the facts, you can review all the evidence, and you can come to the best solution that you possibly can. But if your client's hurting themselves or they're continuing to damage your strategy, then you're out of luck.
Yeah, the thing is, what really is capturing my attention is that uh, in every case that you are involved, you need to have some flexibility in your set of mind. Different
Hmm.
mentalities, different set of minds, different outcomes. Maybe things doesn't go the way you want to go in sometimes, and you need to have some like mental resource, mental stability to manage first of all yourself and then the people or the company that you are, let's say, supporting, right?
Hmm.
So sometimes you don't learn that in college.
No, no, you do not.
Huh?
No, and
Right?
it's definitely interesting. You don't learn dealing with people in college. You don't learn it in law school. It's definitely based on your experiences. And so, I've been lucky. I feel like I've had such a variety of experiences that it's kind of set me up to deal with a lot of different people in a lot of different situations and capacities. But you're exactly right. It's definitely not something that you can be taught. It has to be learned, and most often it's learned the hard way.
With the exposure that you have been having in the port checkoff from your law firm, with your experience, what do you think are the main challenges in the pork industry right now? Their
So
health, exports, China, with the exposure that you have been having, what do you think are the main challenges right now for the pork industry in the USA?
So I think when we're looking we can't just solely focus on the pork industry when we're looking at legal and policy challenges. We have to look at all of ag kind of together because what happens to one industry is going to affect pork in one way or another. Pork is it's a very niche industry. It's very different from how most of the other proteins are raised and grown. And so we just have to apply it a little bit differently. And so right now, what I'm seeing across agriculture is a lack of planning for the future. It's a lack of treating our operations like the business structures that they are, and kind of seeing how, that has interplay in our international markets and our exports and our imports and things like that. Because if we're not planning for the future, if we're signing agreements or contracts that maybe they work today, but they're not going to work tomorrow. How is that going to negatively impact what we can ship across state lines, what we can ship to other countries? Obviously, there's been a lot going on with tariffs lately, and I think a lot of maybe fear mongering in that area. But people are not necessarily taking action. They're just kind of sitting still and waiting for the storm to pass before taking action. And we have to be a little bit more proactive when it comes to how we're treating these businesses and how we're planning.
And what's the specific method that do you think is education, is workshops, is how when you say we need to have more planning, how
Mhm.
that really happens in practical ways?
So I think that at the end of the day, all producers, they know that there needs to be a plan for the next generation to some extent. I think that that comes down to using your resources and going out and finding someone who can help you. I think it boils down to communications that we have within our families and within our operations. And then I do think that there's an opportunity for local and state resources, especially like extension programs, to really grow in developing that local education on the importance of planning for the future. Because, I think we talked earlier about the generational shift and my generation coming up, and even I would say very much in the millennial generation as well. A lot of them are now coming back to the farms maybe a little bit later than some of my generation is, but we're looking at this almost fear from the more senior generation of having these conversations. There's this fear of not wanting to pass things down. And at the end of the day, these are multi-million dollar operations with extremely complex structures. There's so many inputs and outputs that are going into these operations. There's contracts that are extending years and years and years. And I had a client and she called me and said, my dad's passed away. His will was not correct for the situation that we needed. And she said, we have a $10 million operation here and we can't make payroll on Friday because he was the only person that had access to payroll. And his name's the only one on the account. And now that he's passed, there's not really anything we can do. How do we handle this situation? And so the question that I've started asking producers is if you died tomorrow, can your farm make payroll next week? Can they buy feed if it's on an account? Can they access all the softwares that you're paying thousands of dollars for? What does this look like? And so I do think that everyone's aware of the need for it. I just don't think they understand how extreme it could be if we're not taking that preemptive action.
That's a reality. Before we start this conversation, also, I was sharing with you. I have another friend in the industry that he runs a AI platform, like a
Hmm.
digital management tool, and he also grow in a ag environment, raising pigs. And he was the one that told me that in the US, a lot of the people that is working inside the farms, they're from Latin America.
Hmm.
And they speak English and they speak Spanish and barely speak English. So that's another, let's say, phase of the industry that maybe sometimes we're not aware of that regarding education and business management. That also has a lot of law implications.
Yeah, it does. Because I think we talked earlier about this new generation being probably the most educated that they've ever been. We're not thinking about maybe if there's anyone else who's higher up in the operation who maybe doesn't have the same education or the same background. And that's not to say that we don't have Latin Americans going back to the farm because that's absolutely happening across the board. We look at Texas A&M. I think they're now a Hispanic serving institution because like 40% of their
Mhm.
student body is of Hispanic descent. And so you start looking at that and you can't disregard those numbers at all. But I think that there's now becoming an assumption as we become a more educated industry, a more active in technology industry, and we just assume that everyone's going to speak English and we assume that everyone's going to understand the English contract that we're putting in front of them. And I think that these assumptions are really going to start causing problems if they're not already. And you're exactly right that that's something that we have to be considering, not only from the legal side, but from an industry side as well.
Yeah, I think that is something that we need to be aware right now in this moment. Uh, in my platforms, we do presential workshops, for example,
Mhm.
and we're planning AI workshop, artificial intelligence in the poultry industry for next year. But I was discussing with my colleague that we're putting this together, and I was saying to him, hey, do you know what? If we plan this today, in 1 years in advance, this information, AI is changing so fast that maybe what is true and what is, let's say, novelty today in 1 year will be obsolete, will be
Yeah.
history because it's changing so fast. So how do you think these very fast changes will affect in the legal side and the pork industry? How we need to adapt faster?
Ooh, I don't think that it's a race. To some extent, it is. But when we talk about adapting new technologies, it's so important that we're doing it intentionally. We're looking at the fine print in these technologies that we're taking on. We're understanding exactly what it can do for us and how it can help us, but we also need to know the weak spots of it. One of the big things that I have some friends in ag tech, and one of the things that we talk about is data ownership. And absolutely, the number one commodity in agriculture in the next few years is going to be data. It's not going to be
Wow.
any food product that we can consume. It's absolutely going to be data. And so, looking at, if I sign on with a software program or if I start working with this platform or this company, who's going to own my data? What are they going to do with that information? And how could that possibly come back and affect me in the future? And so I don't think that we're there yet where, I think the scary theory, and this is not me fear mongering, but one of the scary theories is, if one big company owns all my data, they're gonna start changing prices because they know exactly what I'm willing to pay for something and how much I can pay for something because they've accessed years and years of my data. So that's kind of one of the bigger concerns that we have right now. It hasn't happened, and but that's a possibility. And so we start looking at just protecting that. While I was at the World Pork Expo, I would say a huge percentage of the booths and the vendors at the expo are new AI data companies. And you start asking them, how's your data stored? What's going on with it? How are you using this data? And most of them wouldn't know the answers to that. And I guess that could be expected because those are maybe some pretty niche questions, but I would want someone selling me a data product to know those answers. But I was talking to one individual and he was kind of bragging because he just thought it was the coolest thing ever that this one platform that they had, it tracks your feed. Whenever you get low on feed, it automatically tells the truck to send you new feed. And that was just kind of one of the features of their big cloud that they had going on. And he said that there ended up being a feed contamination issue, and that truck had crossed state lines. And so, because they could track where it had come from, they could track what farm it went to. He thought it was so cool that they took that data right away and they immediately went to state authorities and just handed it over. And so, that's the farmer's data. You have a third party now who's so intertwined with your organization that they can go to the government and provide this information about you. And now I don't know all of the details, and maybe it didn't happen exactly like that. That's just how he understood it to have happened. But these are absolutely concerns that we should be thinking about as we're adopting technology. So when I say it's not a race, it is to some extent. We don't want to be left behind, but we have to be very, very intentional about how we're adopting.
I think that, by the way, I didn't see this discussion coming.
Oh.
But wow, it's raising my attention because I have never thought about that.
Hmm.
That right now, with so many platforms capturing data, where the legally and where the protection of your data, uh, how much exposure a company can be without authorization, where your data is going,
Hmm.
and how a third party can use that, not exactly for a nice intention. So is very sensitive.
It's very, very sensitive. Absolutely.
And when, let's say, companies are putting all their information in a software, where that is going, where it's
Hmm.
landing, who has access to that, cost, financial private issues, right?
Yeah.
So how you will recommend that, or what will be your advice right now to the industry to be, let's say, sensitive and careful? We need, in some degree, all this fast information, that data, to make faster decisions, to have also information instant time, real time. But in the other side is the sensitive, let's say, side, where my information is going, and who will have access to that, even international, another countries, I don't know.
Yeah, because even at Expo, there were several software groups there that were from Asian countries, and how they can protect and access data outside of the United States and how that's regulated, we're not really sure yet on what that would look like. So I would say that the agricultural industry, specifically pork, has always been very relationship based. We trust each other. We trust that everything's going to kind of work out the way that it's supposed to.
Everything is
Eh,
clean.
Yeah. I would say that, that's great to have. We need to be building relationships within this new niche of agriculture, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to read the fine print. That doesn't mean we're not going to ask questions. We're not going to take people at their word when it comes down to how the importance of some of these things. And so, we have a lot of clients who are hiring attorneys to review their data agreements before signing them. And that's been the overarching theme moving forward is, as we're kind of growing into this, let's treat these data agreements like we would a solar or a wind lease. We can negotiate them. We can work with the companies on how this is going to be owned and operated. I will say for contract farmers, they may not have that option. A lot of times your packer or your owner is going to tell
Yeah.
you what data to use, and that's just kind of how it is. But for our independent farmers, that's the advice that I would definitely give.
And your firm is capable to support these contracts?
Say that one more time.
That your firm, your company
Oh, yes.
is let's say is okay to support. You can do that service
Yes.
to the
Yep. My
growers.
my company can do that, and there's a lot of law firms around the country, especially those that are working in just the agricultural space generally. That's something that you can find.
We have a couple more minutes regarding one subject that I think you are very involved is trademarks. What do you think is the mentality or the culture of trademarks in the pork industry right now? Everybody is aware of that, or is something that we need to raise more awareness?
I definitely don't think a lot of people are aware of the value of trademarks and how they can be used. I think they've always kind of been seen as maybe this thing that Nike and, these bigger companies would have. But as we're growing our farming operation brands through social media, we're doing a lot more digital media with companies. Um, I have noticed a trend going towards, away from these big packers and more towards direct to consumer products. There's absolutely a need to protect the brand that you have, and that's where trademarks come in. And, whether or not you want to trademark just within your state or within the whole country. But I think there's definitely a need for more education on how they work. And I definitely see a need, especially in certain niche areas within the pork industry for more trademark access.
And again, I love these questions because I'm very practical. When you say more education, that's let's say responsibility of Port Chekhov, whose responsibility of providing more education?
So I would say I think that it's our responsibility as an individual producer to seek out those resources. If you're doing a lot of direct to consumer, you're really promoting your brands. There's you're gonna come across things maybe on social media or just YouTube, however it is that you're promoting, and just seeking out those resources to get more information. I don't necessarily think that would fall under anyone's job to provide education, but maybe just educating ourselves on that. And I think conversations like these, where we're having people talk about why we might do this. And I did speak at it was a beef conference, sorry, but I was speaking at a beef
Okay.
conference around just direct to consumer branding, and that was part of the topic that came up. And there were a lot of questions, absolutely, but I don't know who's I wouldn't put that under just one person or one entity's job to provide that education.
What I'm just, let's say, seeing right now with your role right now in the Port Chekhov, besides you being a law firm that you can provide some services and support, also I see that is a lot of, let's say, let's put it this way, opportunity to raise awareness of so many subjects like this AI protection, this
Hmm.
trademarks, let's say awareness. So you are not just becoming like a service firm, but also you are seeing some, let's say, opportunities that the industry needs to put more attention, and you can put some value in that.
Yeah, and I don't want to get the port check off or the National Port Board in trouble with this conversation. So I would say that, that's their own entity. I'm not an employee of the National Port Board
Yeah,
or the
I
port
know.
check off. So just to have that on the record. But absolutely, I think that, I've gotten very involved in social media myself and trying to spread education, spread awareness, and what that looks like. And I definitely think that there's, a need and people are seeking to learn more. And I think that's just been a really interesting thing that we've kind of grown as an industry.
No, I really believe that this conversation is supporting the pork checkoff completely, because my thinking is in the middle time that we have more open spaces to have discussions, and how we can add value and how we can become better. And I have been involved with pork checkoff since I started my career in pork around end of the 90s, and it's a big industry, but also is a lot of expansion that we can do, and mostly in this transition of generations is something that is this time of let's say of our history is very important
Hmm.
in how we communicate, how we improve so many challenges, health challenges. Right now, we have a big disease in China, in Dominican Republic, how we're besides peers, right? So there is a lot of we need more of these spaces, Regan. We need more discussion, and from different angles. Maybe my angle is mostly education and connecting people, putting together the dots and raising conversations, right? And there is the beauty of how we can raise more awareness to create more ideas and more approach for the benefit of the industry.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that, conversations like this, like you said, like this is a great opportunity for people just to kind of pop in, see maybe what we're talking about, whether or not it applies to them and how they can take that information and kind of move forward and maybe learn more or continue those conversations.
For example, my take of my summary of this discussion is your passion of keep learning,
Mm,
raise awareness in the AI data, and
yeah.
raise awareness in the trademark. That is something that we need to put attention in. So that's, let's say, the very nice summary of this conversation. What do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think just the big takeaway would be, there's the more we learn, the more we educate ourselves, the having an attorney in your corner can absolutely expand your company, your organization, your operation, and keep you going and thriving for generations to come.
And I may think that you are an expert cooking pork or not?
In cook
Ribs,
in cooking pork?
yes or not?
Oh, I would hope so. I've been doing it for
Well,
quite some time.
well, the thing is, when I was in the expo, I have been so many times in the expo. So one of the tents that they were at the end, one afternoon, they were hanging some bacon, cooked
Okay.
in different way with maple syrup, with sugar, with hot spicy things, even with chocolate. Honestly, was the honey bacon, the maple honey bacon is the best bacon I have ever tasted.
Maple honey. That sounds fantastic. I tell you what,
Was crispy, flavor, that sweet and bacon taste. Honestly, the best, the
I
best
was
ever.
in, I think, Milwaukee, maybe a year ago, and I walked in this random coffee shop, and they had a salted pork fat maple latte, and it was the best coffee I've ever had, and it was just the way that I think, we're using pork and we're looking at pork now has just changed and it's so, so exciting. Looking at all these different flavor profiles, I absolutely love it.
Okay, so I went to a family reunion like 1 month ago, 2 months ago in Guatemala, and then one of my sister-in-law, she brought a cake, and they
Hmm.
say, okay, I will challenge you. Find the ingredients. And the recipe was bacon inside the cake.
Really?
And makes
Was
sense
it like
because
chunks of bacon or was
they
it really,
they
really
they they
fine?
fry it, then they chop it like
Okay.
very, and then put it into the mix. They put it to the oven, and then it tastes like you're having hotcakes with bacon. So
That's
it's like,
awesome.
yeah, it makes sense, right?
Yeah, that sounds great.
So there is a lot of new ideas. So Regan, thank you very much for the time. I really appreciate your time. I know that you're really busy. And like I said, our main vision and our passion is connecting people,
Mhm.
to making this space to raise ideas and to broad conversation that we can add value to the industry. So Regan, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was great talking with you.
Thank you. Bye bye. Ciao.